specialist subject. I could talk for hours about this. I hate this, by the way. If you want to get diagnosed autistic, it's good to know about this stuff. But this is an extract from the DSM-5, which is the diagnostic manual, basically. So these are diagnostic criteria, and it doesn't represent the entire autistic experience, and it's quite pathologizing and stigmatizing. So to get diagnosed with autistic spectrum disorder, or autism as I prefer to call it, you've got to have a variety of social deficits or impairments, and I don't like that framing, and I'll come on to explain why. But things like struggling with reciprocal conversation, or you put two autistic people together that are on the same wavelength, and they might well have a reciprocal conversation, it just might not match the neuronormative standard of conversation. So things like, if we're telling a story about something that's upset us or traumatized us, the other person, if they're autistic, they might say, oh, that reminds me of this time that this thing happened to me. And then the first autistic person will think, oh, that's good, so they understand. If a neurotypical population have that same conversation, they might go, oh, you're always making it all about you. And it's just a social difference. Who's to say what's right and wrong? So you've got to have the communication differences, I'll call them, to get diagnosed autistic. But you also have to have two of these things on the right. So, and this is right out of the arc. It's the stereotypical presentation of autism. It's based around observing the behaviours of little boys that are very serious and a bit geeky and nerdy, I think, and they're white as well. It hasn't moved with the times and started to look at how things could present themselves in other demographics. Insistence on sameness and inflexible adherence to routines and rituals and things like that. Yeah, a lot of us have that, but it might not be a massive part of the presentation. And hypo or hypersensitivity to sensory inputs. So some of us are sensory seekers, some of us have sensory issues. Like you might have noticed when you came in, I have my sunglasses on. I'm going to put them back on now actually, because between that bright projector there and the light coming out of the projector itself, that is quite harsh for my sensory environment. But this is common in autism and ADHD as well, but it affects everybody differently. And there are some autistic people that really like the sensory inputs. So our youngest daughter used to lie on the floor next to our PA system, so it could be pounding some heavy bass lines and reverberating through the floor, and she liked both the noise and the vibrations and sought that out. And highly restricted fixated interests that are abnormal, check that, in intensity and focus. So let me reframe that. This is monotropism, which is the ability to really zoom in on something. It's otherwise known as expertise. So it isn't a pathological thing, it's not an obsession, but highly focused special interests are an autistic trait and a diagnostic criteria. So this is how I prefer to think about it. So the spectrum is like a wheel and everyone has a different profile. Yes, there's some differences in perception, how we perceive the world, how inputs from our environment affect us. Executive function, so I should have had a slide about this, but executive function is how we behave and interact with the world, and things like getting started on tasks. Things like inhibition, so knowing when not to say the wrong thing and that kind of thing. Working memory, ability to organise and prioritise, tidiness and that kind of thing. Sensory, our sensory filter, so people that don't have sensory processing disorder, they're not overwhelmed with sensory inputs, and then they're not having to constantly seek them out. They've got a filter and they can just cope with a more normal level of sensory input. Language, yeah, some autistic people are non-verbal or have selective mutism or situational mutism. Some of us learn to talk late, some of us are very precocious, maybe overly formal. I swear a lot. It's taking a conscious effort at corporate talks to not. But yeah, I swear like a sailor. Motor skills, so arguably you could say, well, that's nothing to do with autism, it's a co-occurring thing, because a lot of us have dyspraxia, which is a global coordination disorder. So we can be late with things like tying our laces, learning to ride a bike, that kind of thing. Some people might have issues with fine motor skills, others gross motor skills, like I'll walk into door frames. I'll walk into the corner of a table and then apologise to it, and then realise I'm talking to an inanimate object. And I'll say, I'm so sorry, you're an inanimate object. I'm still doing it. Yeah, it can be very awkward.